August 2nd, 1589. In a chamber filled with incense and silence, King Henry III of France lies dying, stabbed in the gut by a fanatical monk. But this is not the end of a conventional monarch. It is the fall of a man who redefined kingship with pearls and powder, who turned the royal court into a living theater of beauty, scandal, and political fragility. To his last breath, he whispered not of God, nor France, but of his beloved male companions, his mignons, whose presence had both delighted and disgusted the kingdom. To understand why the world whispered when Henry walked by, and how a king became the symbol of all that royal masculinity was never meant to be, we must turn back to the day he was born, and follow his path from a delicate boy with doll-like hands to the monarch who defied every rule. September 19th, 1551. The cries of a newborn echoed through the royal palace. France had another son, Henry, the third boy born to King Henry II and Queen Catherine de' Medici. Unlike his brothers, who would grow into the martial roles expected of royal sons, this child was different from the very beginning. While Charles and Francis thrashed about with wooden swords and rode ponies with wild abandon, young Henry sat quietly among the tapestries, fascinated by silks, tiny figurines, and embroidered dolls. The palace nannies murmured their concern. Tutors sent notes to the queen, and Catherine, stern, calculating, and ever watchful, felt the first flicker of worry take root in her heart. As the child grew, so too did his eccentricities. While the other boys stank of sweat and horsehair, Henry's presence always smelled faintly of lavender and orange blossom. He detested dirt beneath his nails, hated the roughness of training gear, and had an almost priest-like devotion to the mirror. By the age of 10, he had memorized the subtle differences between Florence and Genoa silks, knew the scent recipes of Venetian perfumers, and had begun insisting on specific powders for his morning toilette. The courtiers were baffled. Catherine was horrified. She tried everything to correct him. Fencing masters were brought in. Hunts were arranged. He was forced to watch executions, to examine weaponry, to memorize military theory. But none of it stuck. His eyes always drifted toward the drapes, the shoes, the posture of the queen's ladies. When placed on a horse, he winced. When asked to fire a musket, he recoiled. Catherine's frustration grew so intense that she ordered his tutors to punish him for every unmanly tendency. But even that couldn't scrub away the part of Henry that seemed almost allergic to war and power. What he loved, unashamedly, was beauty. As he entered adolescence, Henry's habits only intensified. The mirror became his confessional. His wardrobe ballooned. He spent hours perfecting his look. Powdered skin, rouged cheeks, brows arched with tiny tweezers, lips tinted with rose. He began mixing traditional male garments with female cuts, slashed sleeves that hinted at bare arms, corset-like bodices hidden beneath his doublets, jewelry layered like a Spanish widow. At court balls, he stood out like a rose among thistles. The most infamous of these balls occurred when he was 16. That night, the chandeliers glistened like galaxies above the parquet floor, and Henry made his entrance like a comet crashing through decorum. His outfit, a scandalous fusion of masculine and feminine, sent gasps rippling through the hall. He wore a tight-fitting pearl-studded bodice, voluminous skirts peeking from beneath a doublet, and around his neck hung a diamond necklace that once belonged to Catherine herself. The entire court froze. Some nobles laughed in disbelief. Others walked out in protest. Catherine, humiliated, saw no choice. Her son had to be removed from Paris. That very year, she orchestrated his election as King of Poland. At 17, Henry was sent away, far from the gossiping courtiers, far from the prying eyes of France, to Krakow, where she hoped the weight of kingship would straighten his spine and correct his inclinations. But exile only granted him freedom. In Poland, the true Henry bloomed. Upon his arrival, the Polish nobility greeted him with cautious optimism. But what followed shocked them into outrage. Henry transformed the austere halls of the Wawel Castle into a stage of spectacle and self-adornment. His morning routine included a perfumed bath, an extravagance considered dangerous and effeminate by Polish standards. followed by hours of grooming. He received dignitaries wearing dresses crafted in Venice, tiaras mounted with rubies, and cheeks powdered to porcelain perfection. No one had seen a monarch like this. Even the courtiers who had once served under flamboyant kings whispered behind his back. He had brought a caravan of French tailors, perfumers, jewelry makers, and servants dedicated solely to his personal appearance. While his Polish subjects expected a warrior king to lead them against threats, Henry remained ensconced in a velvet cocoon of self-worship and extravagance. Diplomats rode home in disbelief. Churchmen muttered prayers, but Henry seemed unfazed. For the first time, he was free to live not as others wished, but as he wished. Then, in 1574, his older brother Charles IX died. The throne of France awaited, and Henry, true to form, abandoned his Polish kingdom in the dead of night, without ceremony, without dignity, and in disguise. But this was no hurried escape of a fleeing monarch. Henry dressed as an Italian noblewoman, complete with veils, corsetry, and flowing silks. For days, he crossed through Europe, slipping from Krakow to Venice, then to Lyon, until he reached Paris. His arrival was as theatrical as ever. The coronation of Henry III was an affair drenched in scandal. He ordered the crown resized to accommodate his coiffure. His robes shimmered with embroidery more suited to a queen than a king. His makeup artist, a Florentine expert in theatrical powdering, was given a place of honor in the preparation chambers. Many nobles refused to attend. Others, too curious to look away, watched with a mixture of revulsion and awe. Once on the throne, Henry made it clear that this would not be a conventional reign. He restructured the royal court into a mirror of his own identity. Fashion, etiquette, and ceremony became as crucial as laws and diplomacy. Royal council meetings often opened with discussions on fabrics and new fragrances. He demanded that every gentleman at court adopt grooming rituals. Men who refused to powder their faces or wear gloves scented with clove and orange blossom were quietly dismissed. But the most shocking innovation came with the rise of the mignons, young, exquisitely dressed male courtiers whom Henry surrounded himself with at all hours. They were not only confidants, but reflections of Henry's aesthetic ideals. Jean-Louis de Nogaret and de Joyeuse and François d'Espinay became more than just favorites. They were symbols. They wore towering lace collars, tight-fitting hose, flowing robes that rivaled women's gowns, and faces painted like portraits. To the people of France, they were beautiful abominations. Nobles seethed, churchmen roared, but Henry saw only splendor. He elevated these boys beyond their birth, granting them duchies, castles, and ceremonial power. He held feasts in their honor. When Joyeuse married, Henry spared no expense, turning the wedding into a state event of operatic excess, filled with floral arches, pearl-covered garments, and banquets designed down to the color of each dish. Henry planned it all himself, hovering over the seating charts like a hostess possessed. And so the court became a garden of peacocks, ruled by a king who wielded perfume like a scepter and silks like a sword. Yet beneath the opulence, France groaned. Political tension brewed. The Catholic League circled like vultures. And far from being a unifier, Henry's rule and appearance made him a target. The splendor of Henry III court, with its velvets and perfumes, was dazzling, but it was also a fragile mask. Beneath the shimmering layers of powder and pearls, France was breaking apart. The wars of religion, which had been simmering since his youth, erupted into flames during his reign. Catholics and Huguenots clashed in bloody riots across the country. Cities burned. Massacres turned rivers red. Henry, caught in the center of this religious firestorm, found himself more alone than ever. His fashion and flamboyance, once a subject of gossip and laughter, now became weapons for his enemies. The Catholic League, led by Henry of Guise, accused him of being morally unfit to rule. Pamphlets circulated through the streets of Paris, showing the king as a painted doll, a puppet of vice, a monarch without virility or virtue. In their sermons, preachers thundered that God's punishment had come in the form of a woman king. and warned that France was damned unless it rid itself of this corrupted soul. And yet, Henry did not change. In fact, he became more devoted to his aesthetic rituals, as if each drop of rosewater and every jeweled ring could shield him from the chaos beyond the palace gates. He created the Order of the Holy Spirit, a religious brotherhood with ceremonies so ornate and symbolic that they more resembled pageants than prayer. His public processions during holy days turned into displays of theatrical devotion. Wearing elaborately embroidered robes and carrying perfumed relics, he processed through the streets under canopies of lace, surrounded by candle-bearing boys and choirs trained to perfection. But the public saw these performances not as faith, but mockery. Bishops refused to say Mass in his presence. Priests denounced him from the pulpit. His subjects no longer whispered, they shouted. France, already divided by creed, now teetered on rebellion. Nobles once loyal to the crown defected to the League. Huguenots refused to recognize his authority. Even his own soldiers questioned whether their king was truly a king or merely a mannequin in a crown. At court, the situation worsened. His beloved mignons, those radiant young men who had once brought light into Henry's world, began to fall. Some died in duels, their beauty cut down by swords drawn in taverns or alleys. Others distanced themselves, fearing political retribution. And others still, stripped of their titles by the encroaching power of the League, faded into obscurity or exile. Henry's inner circle shrank. His daily rituals remained unchanged, but behind the closed doors of his chamber, mirrors reflected a man increasingly alone. The breaking point came in 1588, on a cold May morning, the day of the barricades. Paris rose in revolt. Citizens, loyal to the Catholic League, took to the streets. Barricades were erected from carts and furniture, forming walls of defiance. Henry, advised by trembling courtiers, realized the capital was no longer his. He fled the city he once ruled in silks and scent, slipping out in haste, yet not without his treasured trunks. As fires burned behind him, he ensured that his gowns, his jewels, and his cosmetic satchels were loaded onto his carriages. Even in escape, appearance remained his armor. The humiliation was complete. The King of France, driven from his own city, now wandered his own kingdom as a monarch without a throne. In the countryside, he attempted to rally what loyalists he had left. But loyalty had become a rare currency. He wrote desperate letters to nobles, begged for alliances, offered lands and favors. Few replied. His enemies, emboldened, moved swiftly. Henry of Guise, the leader of the Catholic League, marched into Paris and was welcomed as a hero. Henry, pushed into a corner, made a final, fateful decision. In December of that year, he summoned the Duke of Guise to Blois under the guise of negotiation. There, within the castle walls, the king's guards fell upon Guise and murdered him. It was brutal, sudden, and deeply personal. Hours later, Guise's brother, the Cardinal of Lorraine, met the same fate. The king, once known for silken sleeves and scented fingers, had ordered the execution of France's most powerful nobleman with cold finality. But it was too late. Instead of restoring control, the assassinations ignited fury. The Catholic League called for Henry's deposition. France fractured further. Henry, desperate and without heirs, turned to his only remaining option, the Huguenot leader, Henry of Navarre. The two met in alliance, a Catholic king and a Protestant prince, bound not by belief but survival. And so, in the final act of his reign, Henry III stood alongside the man who would one day replace him. Together, they marched toward Paris, hoping to reclaim the capital from League control. But the walls were thick with resistance, and their cause remained fragile. It was in this tense atmosphere, as plans were drawn and armies aligned, that death found the king. On August 1st, 1589, a Dominican monk named Jacques Clement was granted an audience with Henry. Claiming to carry letters of intelligence, Clement approached the king in the garden at St. Cloud. When Henry opened the documents, the monk struck, driving a knife deep into the king's abdomen. Screams rang through the palace. Guards fell upon Clement, and killed him instantly, but the damage was done. Henry lingered through the night, his body racked with agony. He refused to see priests. He asked not for the Bible. Instead, he called for a mirror. As his life slipped from him, he examined his face one last time. Whispering the names of his beloved mignons, those now long dead, he smiled faintly. His final request was not for forgiveness or remembrance, but for the placement of a favorite ring upon his finger. The next morning, August 2nd, King Henry III of France, last of the House of Valois, died. His death marked the end of a dynasty, but it also marked the end of a reign unlike any other. Henry III had been many things: a devotee of beauty, a patron of the arts, a man of secret tenderness, and a figure of public scorn. His image blurred the line between monarch and myth, between scandal and sovereignty. He governed not through iron, but through incense and illusion. And for that, history has never agreed on what he truly was: a failure, a visionary, or something in between. But he proved one truth beyond denial: that in a world ruled by masculine might and religious orthodoxy, a king could still live on his own terms, soft, scented, misunderstood, and defy the age that demanded he be something else. Let Henry's story be a mirror, just as he so often stood before his own, not only reflecting who he was, but reflecting who we dare to be.